Okay, hi everyone. This is the third installment on the syllabus video, and we're going to be talking about um, the course content and giving sort of a general survey of what we're going to be chatting about in the course. So um, first thing to note is that we're basically going to be doing like 2 or 3 philosophers a day, right? Or a week, excuse me. So generally speaking, the content of the class is going to track with whoever we're talking about, right? So for instance, we might look at, say, the answer to a question from Plato, and then we might not entertain that question again, right? Different philosophers will ask different questions. So first, for week one, we're going to be kind of discussing, well, what is philosophy? Like, what's the point of it? How does it work? And then we're going to be covering these so-called pre-Socratic philosophers. And these are guys that existed or lived before Socrates. So they're kind of the very first philosophers that we know of in the West. I think that there's some Eastern philosophers who predate the pre-Socratic philosophers. But as far as the West goes, we're going to be looking at the very first set of figures. So there, I think we're going to talk about like 6, just very broadly talk about maybe 5 or 6 different pre-Socratic philosophers. And then we're going to move on to the kind of classic touchstone ancient Greek philosophers, Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. We're going to get kind of broad surveys of a number of their views. So we're going to look at kind of Socrates's method of questioning people and seeking out truth. We're going to talk about Plato's theory of the forms and kind of the relationship between form and matter. And then we're going to look at Aristotle's answer to the question about form and matter, and also his ethics. So you'll notice that both of these weeks, we have a supplementary reading. So for the first week, we're going to do the Allegory of the Cave. And then the next week, we're going to have an excerpt from the Nicomachean Ethics from Aristotle. Then the next week, we're going to be doing a little bit of medieval philosophy from St. Augustine and St. Thomas Aquinas. These guys are going to give us answers to, like, does God exist? What's God like? What does the good life consist of? And we're going to see kind of a very different set of ideas than we saw here with Socrates and Plato. But they're nevertheless going to be building on those previous ideas as well. So for week 4, we're going to move into kind of the early modern era with Descartes and Spinoza. And so we'll look at Descartes' argument against a position called skepticism. So according to skepticism, we actually can't know anything at all. And that's a problem. And so we're going to go over how it is that Descartes defeats what we might call radical skepticism. Then we're going to move on to Locke and Hume and Berkeley. There's going to be a lot of interesting stuff here about perception, a lot of interesting stuff about how it is that our concepts work, right? So we're going to get a view called empiricism at this part of the course. And according to empiricism, knowledge is based only on sensory experiences. And that's going to be a major touchstone theme. But we're also going to look at some of Locke's political philosophy. So notice that we're going to be, we're going to have 2 supplemental readings for this week. We're going to look at Locke's 2 treatises on government, where he kind of lays out the state of nature and how we get to justify the society that we live in, the political structure. And then we're going to look at Berkeley, and we're going to be looking at a little bit more detail about his argument that there are no bodies at all. So is really interesting. He thinks that we are all immaterial souls, and that God kind of dumps perceptions into our souls such that we think we're seeing real things, kind of like this water bottle here. We think we're seeing objects, but there are no objects in reality, right? It's interesting. Okay, and then we're going to talk about Hegel and Kant and Kierkegaard. Here we're going to be talking about ethics once again. So there's no supplemental reading for this section of the course, but we are going to be talking about Kant's deontology, and there should be a video available on that. And then Kierkegaard and Hegel, they were interlocutors, and so we will see later in the course how it is that they debate one another, right? How they respond to one another. And then we move into the 19th century with Marx and Freud and Darwin. And so we're going to be looking at the Sophie's World chapters on Marx and Darwin and Freud, just kind of generally speaking, what their contributions were to philosophy and kind of how they moved the 19th century into the kind of trajectory we get into the 20th century. And then lastly, for our last week, we're going to be kind of covering philosophy today, right? So by this point, we will be done with Sophie's World, and we'll be looking at what we might call some modern day epistemology. So we're going to be looking at various principles to help us understand the nature of knowledge, right? So we're going to be looking at a definition of knowledge called the justified true belief definition. Then we're going to see why that definition has problems. And then we're going to be talking about the epistemology of the victims of rape, right? Should we believe those who say that they have been the victim of a sexual assault, right? This will kind of be a nice applied question for something that I think is really interesting today. So anyway, I look forward to having you in the course.